Call the meeting to order.
The meeting has been posted according to open meeting laws.
Roll call.
President Seeger.
Here.
Trustee Renucci.
Here.
Commissioner Arndt.
Here.
Commissioner Batani.
Here.
Commissioner Hayes.
Here.
Commissioner Lederhouse.
Here.
Commissioner Morath.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, per Village Resolution 2017-01, anyone wishing to address the Planning Commission during citizen participation will be allowed 5 minutes. Your subject can be anything, whether on the agenda or not. The Planning Commission should not engage in a discussion regarding comments because it was not part of a publicly noticed agenda. Upon conclusion of the citizen participation segment, members of the audience are not allowed further comment unless they are participating in a public hearing or specifically allowed by a majority vote of the Planning Commission due to involvement in the agenda item. That being said, Mary would like to say anything? All right, I'll close citizen participation and move on to approval of the commission minutes from April 11th.
Motion to approve as presented.
Second. Discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, discussion related to potential revisions to the Village Zoning Code, Chapter 510, by establishing a central business transition district and related matters. Does anybody have any questions for Tim and his memo that he did present to us?
I had one, just to ask, to clarification. I noticed now that the central business, it now is down back in here. The central business area in the map on the second to last page, the red part extends in across Austin Street, and I was just curious if that was the case or if it was going to change.
So the red area is a central business district as it exists right now. Okay. Yep. And that area in particular that you're talking about, that's going to become part of the transition area.
Any other questions for Tim?
So did I get the parking right? I mean, that was a big discussion at the
Yeah,
last
I think
meeting.
that the parking
Okay.
was right on as far as your description and the 2 per area and off-street, yes. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I agree. This is exactly what I was looking for, and I like the disclaimer, the case by case if we need to.
I'll be looking for a motion then.
So the motion would be to basically direct staff to put this on the agenda for the next meeting for a public hearing.
Motion to recommend to staff to adopt an ordinance.
Second. Discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right, discussion related potential revision to the Village Zoning Code, Chapter 510, by establishing an overlay district for design standards in TID number 4. We did get a chance to review that, and we do have a piece of paper that should have been in front of each of you tonight. That is a basic description of some of the buildings that we are having in our industrial park now, and on the back side of that, some of the descriptions of materials that are talked about in that for TID number 4. Questions for Tim?
I think they all look pretty good, and if we're going to be following this, as long as we don't get too goofy with restrictions, I guess we'll be in good shape.
I think that the restrictions that we'll have will be to make sure that they maintain the value in those areas to accommodate what we need for the TID that's developed for that area.
I totally agree, and I understand. I just was kind of referring to past practice in other parks that we've had that had limitations.
I have one question. I didn't see that it was addressed in here, Tim, and One thing I know that we've been asking of new developments is that they enclose the dumpsters, the recycling trash, which is not a requirement in light industrial zoning in our code. I'm wondering if we might want to consider adding that so that that remains a requirement. One other thing that I noted in the TID 3 requirements as well, and obviously for new buildings we have this and probably for additions as well, but they had noted that freight handling should be at the sides of the building, not, or back of the building, not facing. I don't know if that's something the commission, or Tim, if that's something that you would recommend.
Yeah, for the dumpster also? I'm sorry, what were you referring to? Amy?
Like loading docks, you know, where they would receive and.
And would they be allowed to have a separate driveway entrance for the loading docks?
I think it's just a matter of making sure that they're not at the front-facing part of the building.
I got that, I understand. I just didn't want to limit them to have a truck that have to pull into the front and go all the way around the building, you know, as far as the being able to come in off one, if they could come off the side or someplace that would keep the traffic down in the front area.
I think the bigger thing is just making sure that they're not roadside-facing as far as any kind of loading docks. Creates visual, that's not necessarily aesthetically pleasing, and also can, if you use the U.S. packaging as a good example for a roadside facing loading dock, it becomes a traffic issue.
I understand,
So
I agree.
if outside of that, I think that on an individual basis, when we look at each one of the developments, we can talk about that.
Okay, the point I guess I was making is, are these developments limited to the number of driveway accesses that they're allowed?
And the amount of frontage that most of these commercial developments have, I think that 2 is not out of the question. In and out, basically.
Okay, I mean, you see what I'm getting at though, right?
I do, but like I said, it's this, you know, Eileen's point is more of an aesthetic and traffic issue. It is for accessibility to get back to where they are supposed to be.
So with regard to the loading docks, it's, labeled as something different. It's, subsection F. It's just referred to as overhead doors. So, you know, we can either play with that label or,
No, I think that's sufficient. I just was looking for different terminology.
Right.
So, yep, that addresses it.
as long as my speaker's on, I'll keep on going. So, sorry, Scott.
That's right, feel the need to talk.
So basically what I did was to try and use, you know, Max Apparel kind of as a baseline, so to speak, building off of what we had talked about previously. Now, the one thing that you don't see here is masonry on the front. So that would be a requirement as drafted, and that's in section H, sub 1. The second full sentence, a minimum of X% of the gross area of street sides must be decorative masonry or decorative metal panels. So that's something I would say above and beyond. So you know, that's a point for your discussion.
So this is a concrete precast building that has a little bit of depth by way of architectural detail and then color variation. It's a masonry product, yes, but it's masonry product. How would that qualify?
Well, as drafted, it would not. So basically, it's masonry, you know, split face concrete, brick, block, or decorative metal panels.
I agree with Scott. I think we have to address this a little bit and look at this because the one example that came to my mind was the city of Elkhorn redid their garage, about a year or two ago, down off of Centralia. And they did precast panels in that building. And after they did it, you know, it got painted, but the building turned out pretty nice. Now, granted, we're looking for something a little bit better, And like Scott said, even if they have precast concrete that can have the relief, correct, Scott? It can look like split stone, or they can do other things with it, but, I don't think we should just summarily dismiss it.
I'm really stating that in this description where we use this Max Apparel, this is their presentation to us, right? And what we're gonna tell them is good, but not good enough. We wanna see some kind of brick or stone face on it. I don't know that that's necessarily needed in a building like this, and I think that it's attractive as it looks. Is there something that we can put in there about having some architectural detail, to offset the front facade, to give it more depth or detail, instead of requiring just brick? Because a lot of these buildings are just kind of going away from brick and things of that sort now. And or looking for more of maybe a stucco exterior look, stuff like that.
That was gonna be my other question too, as far as why limitation at 25% of the wall area.
So with regard to, your question about architectural interest or variety on the front facade, that's in, subsection B, exterior walls, where it talks about, kind of breaking up those big massive planes of a single wall into component parts, and you can do that with any number of features, and they're listed there. So you might, use, structural, non-structural pilasters. You might use metal panels that are, set in and out. Any number of things that can be done. So that's basically the architectural variation I think you're trying to get at. Masonry is something, above and beyond that.
So in here, though, you have the block or aggregate panel crossed off. Wouldn't this building right here, as it's presented, work if you simply had the aggregate detail? I personally think that this building is attractive enough for our industrial park, and I don't want to push another requirement on top of it, in my mind. It's an industrial park. And I know we want to make it aesthetically pleasing and maintain a certain value, but I think adding brick to it's not going to change that in this building.
That's why I brought it up. I just wanted to make you aware of it. So the intent is to strike that entire sentence.
I think that just leaving in block or aggregate panels would accomplish the same thing.
Right. So essentially, the entire building has to be built of sturdy and good-looking materials. And then we've got a list, okay? And what I did is previously had aggregate panels, and then I crossed that off because I basically lumped that in with smooth and aggregate precast panels. Okay? I guess what I'm hearing is we should just strike the whole sentence. No brick, no masonry requirement.
I guess my question would be, instead of saying, no block, or, just keeping it, let me see here, where am I?
Well, I think that what Tim's stating, 40, is that in the previous section, in section B, where it describes exterior walls, it already talks about that offset of an architectural feature.
Right.
So in Tim's comment about eliminating that sentence, yes, that makes the most sense.
Okay.
Because we've already addressed it previously in this.
I just didn't want to say, I was just looking at the wording and saying brick block. I was gonna say stone face block would probably be something, yeah, it's.
So is that agreeable? We'll strike the second full sentence in materials.
Can I ask one other question in this regard before we move on? With the sentence about do not exceed 25% of the wall area with, stucco or ephes. And I guess, I don't know what the theory was. I mean, I've seen some pretty nice stucco jobs.
I'm not a contractor, I'm not a builder, but stucco and ephes, they just don't last.
Exactly it. That's exactly the point. You're right. They don't have a good, history in this climate. The ephes, it's not installed properly, and there's no way to truly flash it from freezing. So everywhere I've ever inspected it, whenever I've looked at homes or commercial buildings, if it's not the ephes itself that's deteriorating, it's the substrate underneath it and the structure. So it's a bad system for this climate.
The only reason I mentioned is 'cause like Brolin Park had stucco done when it was built, and it's still doing really well.
I went and looked at it real close, I'd tell you it doesn't.
Okay, that's fine. I've done 2 or 3 homes with stucco work on them, so you're right, though. It doesn't last as long as stone face block or, precast concrete. But I was just,
Because of our
I was more concerned about just limiting thing, at least for, and maybe
Well, and-
maybe the 25% does make sense then.
Yeah, and again, for
for a
just trying to
decorative
make sure that
point.
we maintain the value of those buildings, not only for the person that built that building, but people that are putting up next to them. Keep it an attractive area that, industrial buildings don't get maintained as well as maybe a residential home does. Want to make sure that you have it of like materials that will last a long time.
So, coming back to materials, essentially, again, we struck a sentence. And I'm just wondering if we also need to, therefore, move some of the other following sentences. Materials. Less than 10 is your way is just to strike everything, second, third, and sub. And the sheet that I passed around, this is a proposed multi-tenant building in the village of Mugwanago. This is brand new, but it's basically, you know, kind of a repeat of the buildings that you see over in their business park. And the reason why I brought this out, or brought this to your attention, essentially, you've got a rendering of what the front looks like. And you've got the floor plan, it's upside down to match the image, but you can see the areas of the different planes, and they use a 4-foot offset between the different parts. And you know, just imagine if that was one continuous wall. And what they did, again, was, you know, to design it again with those architectural features, you know, breaking up that wall into any number of planes. Some of these are a little bit larger than what's in our code. So the part that I'm looking at is subsection B, and there it talks about breaking up those large walls. Anything more than 6,000 square feet has to be broken up into planes not exceeding 3,000 square feet. So there's a number of parts of this building that one is at 3780 in terms of the area in the middle, and then further to the right, then there's one at 3168. The building that they have here could meet the standard that we have in our code. So this was a real world example comparing to what the proposed language is. Does that kind of make sense? The other thing to note is on Exhibit B, showing the map of the proposed overlay district, we excluded the apartments and the mini storage that were previously, part of the overlay district. Because going forward, we're not allowing personal storage facilities.
Could you explain that last detail as far as?
Okay. So, if you could go to Exhibit B. So those two long rectangles to the east of South Executive Drive. This was taken before the apartments and the mini storage, but those two parcels are excluded from the overlay district. Right.
I guess, from what I understood though, you're not gonna allow storage units?
Mini storage.
Or mini storage and anything else that we're gonna be doing from here on in?
In that area,
Oh, okay, all right, that's what I wanted to get clear on.
that is not part of our, future business development plan.
Okay. And the reason is, if I can just expand, basically you want to create employment centers or employment opportunities for people. Mini storage is a cash machine for the owner, and that's all it is. Building itself is taxed relatively low. So you just want to have that tax increment paying off your investment, and mini storage is not the way to do it.
I have one question related to this map, RXUP 55, that is directly south of the existing apartments, that parcel. I believe it's currently zoned for.
So that may or may not be residential. Having a part of the overlay district would, be preemptive, but it would, address that potentiality of it getting rezoned and then having to end the area of the overlay district. I guess I don't see a downside.
As long as you don't think it would affect.
It's a good question.
I had one question, the lot next to it that fronts, Toronimi, that is between Toronimi's apartments and 120, that is now zoned commercial business, correct? Okay, so we'd have commercial business and then going south, then that's zoned residential?
So coming back to your question, which is a good one. So I would, I guess the other argument to say, well, if it's going to be rezoned to industrial, then you would just apply the overlay district at that. Avoid any kind of confusion between, well, can I do residential on this property? So.
If I'm understanding correctly, we would eliminate that property from the current exhibit and apply the.
Questions for Tim? We need a, motion on that one, right? Work on that, it's there, but
If you're so inclined, you could certainly make a motion like you did previously, setting a public hearing date with the revisions as discussed at the meeting.
looking for a motion from one of the commissioners.
Okay, I'll motion to forth for, hearing with all the,
A second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Already did. Discussion related to potential revisions to the zoning code, chapter 510, with regard to residential driveway standards. Any questions on this one? Question on this one? In this, section E1, it's talking about 40 feet from the right-of-way, maximum width of the driveway would be 12 feet. And if it's less than 40 feet, then it could be 20 feet. Odd to me. My driveway is 44 feet from the right-of-way, and my approach is 20 feet wide because I've got a 3.5-car garage on my house, so if I were to go down to 12, that'd be odd.
That's where we ran into a problem with Mr. Bartle about a couple years ago.
No, that's not where we ran into the problem with it. That's the next part. Let's finish this one, and then we'll go on
All
to
right.
that. So yeah, Tim, I'm looking for some direction from you on that.
So, you know, typically a residential driveway is not right at all. I mean, it's basically intended to provide a vehicle path for, you know, somebody driving off the street into the property, and it's not meant for, you know, wide berth. Again, basically, you're basically, if there's a sidewalk there, right? You know, you're putting the
There is in my scenario.
That?
There is a sidewalk in my scenario.
Okay, so basically you've got a wider berth of what, you know, making sure that there aren't any pedestrians in the driveway when you're backing out.
I had a question in regards to that, though. I'll think of it in a minute. I hit it, I'm sorry, I've remembered now. One of the items that we were discussing, or what was being discussed, was the width of the actual driveway in relation to the size of the overhead door. And in my opinion, the driveway should be wider than the overhead door, because if you had a garage, and I'm sure I know people have done it, I've done it going to customers' homes. You pull up in the driveway in the wintertime, you open the door, you get out, and you step into snow, because there's nothing there to clean snow away, because the driveway is only as wide as the overhead door.
I think that, in this section, where it's talking about 40 feet, mine is 44 feet long, and having a 2-car garage area, it only allows for 2 cars parked in the garage. But if I were to have that only 12 feet wide, difficult thing to turn and traverse backing out of that garage into a 12-foot wide area. I won't change my approach with. It will stay that same size as I replace it this year. So I'd love to do it legally.
That was another point too, Scott, as far as the depth of the driveway and the setbacks that the homes are set at, that don't leave enough room between the sidewalk and the overhead.
What we're using as an example is the setback of the house may be within about a 25 or 30-foot section, but that the house that I own jogs back quite a bit to where the actual garage door itself is. That's where the setback goes. More than that 40 feet wouldn't exactly accommodate what this is stating. That's my first thing that I have to ask about. The second thing that I'd like to talk about is the tapering starting at the 8 foot. I agree with that. I and a number of people that live in this community have mud puddles for front yard and driveway areas because of that 8 foot setback. Way too restrictive, and it's not solving anything. It's causing, in my opinion, an aesthetic issue. Then people aren't allowed to do anything but maybe throw some stone down there. Mudstone becomes another unsightly mess. So I'm not talking about making my entire front yard, my entire front yard a driveway, but I am looking for, change in that possibly to accommodate just a simple angle off of the right-of-way, not to have any 8 foot setback, and if nothing else, maybe have a discussion about at what angle that could go to, because you wouldn't want to leave it open, to have it go all the way down to like a 180-degree area and have a little strip of grass in front of it and say, well, it's still angled. You want to be able to at least maybe say it's a 45-degree angle. You could start right at the right-of-way instead of waiting until an 8 foot setback where the taper starts. Your opinions on that, Tim?
So, when we had drafted this, Erin was on the Plan Commission, right? So I mean, she was bringing up a different perspective in terms of what those numbers should be, and I think this is kind of where we settled.
I missed that meeting.
Very well. But basically, these are policy questions in terms of, the numbers here do affect how a neighborhood looks, right? I don't think there's any right or wrong. Having that taper, was talked about. Again, the number that was arrived at was 8 feet, right or wrong. It could be, 0 feet with a, maximum angle, or it could be 3 feet or something. So I don't think there's any right or wrong.
Scott, do we possibly look at the setback of the home itself and the garage from the roadway so that if there is a malfunction, some homes have 3-car garages, then that home has to then be set back further in the lot, so that allows a transverse without having to drive on the grass?
That, or if they cannot bring that house back any further because it's already built or something of that sort, then allow for that width at the end of the driveway to be a little bit wider?
I would definitely agree with that, but what I'm saying going forward with developers, that we tell them, don't give the homeowner, the new homeowner, the troubles of driving on the grass, because especially if the garage is at right angles, in other words, the overhead doors point to the side instead of the front, they have to now get around the back, and you want to make sure they have enough room to be able to pull in to park. But even in this instance, if you have a 3-car garage, you're going to have enough room to be able to pull around and get in. And what I'm saying is maybe if they were to set that garage back a little, or the home.
I'll tell you what, let's talk about the driveway part, and then...
Well, the driveway connects to the house.
Hold on, 40. If we're talking about setbacks on houses, it's a totally different discussion. And what we have for an agenda item is driveways. If we want to talk about setting back houses, that's fine. But what I want to talk about today is what's on the agenda, and that's driveways.
And I think we make the driveway longer.
We have 2 problems that need a solution. We have Scott's problem with people with existing driveways with mud puddles. And we have the future, every house is going to have a 3-car garage from here on forward that's built in this village. Almost every house. We have to allow a bigger curb cut. I mean, if I have a 3-car garage and I have an 8 foot taper to get to my 3rd car, it's not going to make me happy. So we have to allow, setback or not, a larger curb cut.
Not just 3rd-car garages either, as a homeowner in the village with a 25-foot setback and 4 vehicles in their household currently, because we have that many drivers, we had to add an apron on our driveway, and having a 25-foot setback and about 10 feet of right-of-way, in that, it just doesn't give you enough. It's a really hard angle that we have now because of that. So I can see, like, if we were using it for a trailer or a camper eventually, we're going to end up with a mud puddle.
When Erin was on the commission, she referred to a concrete jungle. I don't think any of us wanna see a concrete jungle, but I want my driveway, my house, and my garage usable. And I think every citizen that's gonna build a house in this community is gonna want their driveway functional, because a lot of us are gonna have the problem that, Eileen has right now, where you have multiple drivers in the house.
And I think that we're a little bit different too in this area, in respect to when people talk about concrete villages. We're rural. We don't jump on a bus or a train to get where we need to for work. We have to drive. So we're going to have cars. We're also living in an area where we have a lot of lakes. I like to go on the lake with a boat. It's fun to swim, but it's better to get out there on the boat first. So we need to accommodate those by having the third car garages, the larger driveways, and allowing people to utilize the space where they live.
And a lot of the homes that they're building these days, the newer homes, are not built like the older homes in the village that have the coach house or the garage set in the back of the yard and with the driveway alongside the home.
I almost think we need to scrap and rewrite driveway, for zoning standards. I guess I don't know where to go numbers-wise with a setback of the house that's already built, or a setback going forward as to where the houses are built. I think we need to work with a number that if the house is set back 25 feet, we have to allow this much of a curb cut. If the house is set back 40 feet, we allow this much of a curb cut without pinpointing too much, but still controlling.
When talking about the approach in, it's not necessarily by way of the 40-foot back, but maybe by way of the fact that it's a two-car attached garage to the home, allowing for 24 feet wide at that roadside, and then where they would have maybe a third car attached, the taper that comes off, or parking pad next to that garage, that taper could come off of the right-of-way and not a setback of any number. But maybe have a restriction of saying that it can only go as far as a 45-degree angle. And, it all the way down and just have a little strip of grass there. Everybody else think?
I have one more question after we're done with this one, Scott. It was about what I brought up earlier as far as the width of the driveways in regards to the garages. That if we're gonna limit the width of the driveway to the size of the garage door, then we're gonna have problems. At least I would have if I owned a home.
Yeah, I don't think that we're limiting it on that. And in talking about this in my comment that I just made earlier, if you've got a two-car garage, which is a 16-foot wide door, 20 to 24 feet wide is accommodating enough.
And that's more than enough. There's a lot of homes on Thomas Drive that were built when you get out of the car and you open the door, you step right in the grass because the driveways are only as wide as the garage door.
So for subsection E, we're basically gonna strike the first sentence. And just say the maximum width of a driveway at the right-of-way line is 24 feet. Now, the second part about the width of the driveway in front of the garage, that's basically established by the width of the garage, not the width of the doors. Typically, you've got a 16-foot, double door, and then you've got 4 feet on each side, so you've got 24 feet width of asphalt.
I think in the code it requires that the approach the approach has to be 6 inches of concrete. Is that what our code says right now? It can't be asphalt.
I'm not sure.
I'm almost positive it
Okay.
says that it has to be concrete. I think I had a discussion with Jason.
It's gotta be hard surface.
It's 6 inches, because that's what they had to do when they redid mine.
But it specifically has to be 6 inches of concrete according to our code, not asphalt. Asphalt, I don't believe is allowed. So if nothing else, make sure we have that in there too. I don't know if that matters.
So that's probably, yeah. So you're talking about the actual sidewalk construction standards?
Between the sidewalk and the road.
Yes.
That section of concrete, the approach has to be 6 concrete.
And are we striking this 8 feet away from the right-of-way for the taper to start, or what are we doing? Yeah.
So, you know, probably have to come up, yes, to answer your question. But, I'll have to come up with some language, you know, talking about that maximum angle. Offhand, I just can't think of what it would say, so I'll come back with something. So what about subsection E sub 3, the width of a driveway for a single-family residence without a garage, exceed 12 feet?
Say that I would agree with that, not allowing for the approach to be wider than 12 feet, but that the driveway itself could then extend into something wider, especially if the driveway came up into the home or facing the home, and then they wanted to put a concrete pad alongside of it. I think that you need it to be a little bit wider. And if no garage, maybe there's a, well, future plans for a garage, and you want to be able to accommodate that. I don't want to limit them, that all they can have is just stacked up, bumper, you know, nose to tail on the cars. They should be able to park a couple cars side by side as long as their lot accommodates it.
So we'll strike, subsection 3. Stay with the 24-foot width at the right-of-way, whether there's a garage or not.
Yeah, I think that's fair. What else think? And everything I think. I want everybody else's opinion too.
So still keeping a 12-foot curb cut? No? That's striking that completely? Okay.
Right into a 24-inch or 24-foot wide drive is allowed.
So given, you know, these changes, not material, I'm just thinking I'll come back with a draft that shows all the changes, just so that we're clear about, you know, what we're doing, what the wording is, as opposed to setting this for public hearing.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. So recommendations for future agendas. We got revision application requirements for rezoning petition.
No, but I have a suggestion for another item, and I just want to discuss it and see if the Design Commission wants to tackle. I've had conversations about it numerous times. For the Central Business District, does the Design Commission want to entertain something that would prohibit franchise type of restaurant? Or even potentially retail, like
Ask a question. Would that be something we may want to ask our legal advice first before we delve any further? Would that be restraint of trade?
Why don't we put it on the agenda and talk about it with maybe staff talking to legal about it in preparation for our discussion. All right, next meeting's going to be June 13th, 6:30, right here. Make a motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.